Hello, listeners. Hi, my name is Madhavi, and I'm so happy to have you on UppTalk. You have come to the right place if you want to learn about IT and do really cool things with your hands. We are not just another IT company when I say UppTalk. Think of us as your learning partner dedicated to helping you reach your full potential. We have top notch hands on courses to help you build your business, whether you are new to technology or want to move up in your current job. Let's look around this as our first step towards learning.
If you remember the discussion we had about the report type, the report type determines the layout of your report, right? The purpose of the advanced report or the idea behind an advanced report is that it allows you to extract that data dump right or extract details about a business object from Workday. If you're talking about worker as an example, you can build an advanced report to extract all the attributes of a given business object. Matrix reports, they instead of getting you the details, they allow you to get the summarized output right. And these are used for your executive reporting, wherein the idea is you're not much interested in getting the details right, or you are getting the high level overview or the summarized numbers. You're not interested in knowing who are those 10 people, let's say, who were hired or terminated. What you want to know is the count of hires and terminations, right? You are interested in understanding those numbers, those summarizations, sums, additions, averages, rather than looking at the data detail itself. To be fair, you can still get the details out of a matrix report. But that's not really the idea behind building a matrix report, right? We saw the layout of a matrix report, right? We saw how it looks in the form of a chart or a graph, and we can add all those options on a matrix report. All right, how do we create a matrix report? The task is the same. The task is create custom report. I don't have that. All right, I'm going to be writing down. About is titles, right? I want to create a matrix report called workers count by company. The report type is matrix, and once again, I have the option of selecting either a standard or an indexed data source. From selecting a data source, all workers for HCMM reporting, this is an indexed data source. When you select an index data source, you can only fetch index fields on your report. However, if you uncheck this optimized for performance, this is an index data source workers for HCMem reporting, right? When you select this, you'll only be able to fetch indexed fields. Let's say I say company. An indexed field is identified by this different color. The one in yellow is an indexed field. The ones with blue icons, these are standard fields. But the reason I'm able to fetch all of these is because I have, even though the data source is indexed, I have unchecked the optimized for performance checkbox. Now, if I check it, then system would return me. You see, now I only get these indexed fields. At times, even if you're using an indexed data source, you may want to uncheck this box because you have to create some calculated fields, right, which are non-indexed. That's when you would want to uncheck this box. Or maybe you want to create some filters and the fields are non-indexed. That's when you would want to still uncheck this box. This, if there is a need, we'll go ahead and uncheck this again. Just like a standard data source, some of the standard data sources, we have seen some indexed data sources also come with data source filter, right? This data source has a number of filters. Currently, it is getting me all active workers, which is the default filter. And if I go in here, instead of getting all active workers, I can get all terminated workers, I can get all employees, I can get all workers, which is both active as well as terminated, and on and forth. There are a number of filters available, and I can select those based on the requirement, right? Some of the data sources indexed as well, they come with these data source filters. Now, if you see the layout in terms of some of these tabs, a matrix report looks similar to an advanced report that we saw. This still filter option prompts. We see output share advanced. These prompts were also part of an advanced report, and we've already looked at some of these prompts, but then these two prompts are new. They are different. They were not part of an advanced report. Also, currently, when I'm in the Matrix tab, my first tab, the layout looks very different from the layout of an advanced report, right? We no longer have the option to add those columns and fields. Instead, I have a few different sections in here. I have something called row grouping, right? And then if I scroll down, I have something called column grouping, and further down, I have something called fields. To summarize, a matrix report, as the name suggests, allows you to get data in the form of a matrix. Right? You can define the parameter based on which you want to group data on the rows as well as on the columns. Let's see how the output looks. My requirement is, we'll start with a very simple requirement and will progressively build further on this report. Right. My requirement is to get the count of workers in my different companies. Company 1, I have 50 employees. Company 2, I have 200 employees, and on and forth. We'll start with a very simple requirement: get the number of workers in each of my companies. I want to get the count of employees based on the company they belong to. One of the grouping parameter, or the only grouping parameter that I see here, is that I want to get data. Which data? The data of the employees, right? Or workers based on the company that they belong to. And what summarized data? I want the count. In row grouping, I have added company, and if I scroll down the UV, we also have something called column grouping, but looks like this is optional. For now, this is all we'll do. Right? I'll go ahead and click, and I'll run my report. Some default inbuilt prompts which are part of the data source. We'll not worry about this. They all look like optional prompts, all right. If you see, we selected company as a row grouping. On each of our rows, we have a specific company listed out: GMS USA, GMS Canada. There's some RXYZ, and against each of these companies, we have a number. The number represents a count, right? If I scroll down right to the bottom, I see that the sum overall total. What does this count represent? If I click on this count against any of these companies, I see that it shows me the number against that count, which is 91, and it is showing those workers. This represents the count of workers in that company. Can I confirm that? Let's open one of these workers. The number against the number against the number against the number against the number against. This worker in fact belongs to GMS Canada, right? GMS Canada has 91 workers including Asif, and I see that the worker belongs to GMS Canada right now. The question is, how is Workday getting me the count? I don't remember adding this. The only thing that we added on our report was the row grouping, and we selected company, right. Point number 2, how is that Workday getting me the count of workers? Again, I didn't specify that it should get me the count of workers. Now, if we go back to the report definition, our row grouping is company, which is what we get here. If I scroll down, there's something called column grouping, which is optional. And if I scroll down further, there's something called defined fields. To summarize, when you're building our matrix report and we are building this grouping parameters, at least one summarization has to be defined. What is the summarization? Based on these groupings, how do you or what summarized data do you want? For each of these companies, Workday is getting me the count, which is the default summarization. You have to have at least one summarization based on which Workday would get you the data. For each of these companies, system is getting me the count. Now, how does the report know that it has to get the count of workers? All this summarization does is it counts the number of instances that are returned by your data source. If you look at that data source, it says assesses the worker as its primary business object and returns one row for each worker. If my organization has 100 workers, right, the data source will return 100 rows of data, right? All this count does is it counts the number of instances that are returned by the data source. If instead of a worker business object, had I selected a different business object, let's say position right, and selected an appropriate data source based on that business object, account would have counted the number of positions. This simply counts the number of instances that are returned based on your data source and based on your filters if you have added them. And then those instances that it counts are grouped against the grouping parameters that you have defined. Count is the default summarization. You must have at least one summarizations. There are other summarizations as well, and we'll talk about that. For example, we can get average, you can get maximum, minimum, sum, on and forth. The default summarization is count. Any questions? Any question? Wait. Apart from defining the row grouping, I can also define the column grouping. Before I go there, let me add a filter because we don't need these 250 odd companies. One thing to know here, it says maximum number of rows, that is 250 to 250. If I go here, it shows me 252. What it does is, it shows me 250 companies starting from here. The first one is blank. There are 2,000 odd employees who do not have any company assigned, and then it shows me 250 companies and everyone else. After 250th row, it shows me as others. The reason it is showing me only 250 rows plus this others code and then the blank is because the default limit for the maximum number of rows is 250. The default limit for the maximum number of rows is 50, right? Similarly, if I want, I can reduce this, I can increase this. Second thing, it is getting me the data based on the overall count in the descending order. The order I can say, instead of descending order based on the row total, I can select a different option. I can say row total ascending alphabetic, descending. And there's another option which we'll talk about. All right, just like an advanced report column can be relabeled. I can also relabel the columns here. The column grouping was optional and we didn't add it earlier. Let me add a column grouping now. I'm adding a grouping called gender first. We'll run this and we'll see how the output looks. Now my column grouping is, my row grouping is company. On each of the rows, I get one company. My column grouping is gender. On each of the columns, I get one of the gender values. Right? I have row grouping as well as column grouping defined. My row grouping is company. My row grouping is gender. Again the way. Maximum number of rows, the default value is 250 and that's why Workday would show 250 rows. The default value for maximum number of columns is 20, right? And had there been more columns for gender, these are the only options configured and that's why it shows all will. But then if there are more than 20 columns, it will again show that other column at the end. Alright, let's edit this. We'll add a filter to our report that we restricted to a few companies, right? We don't want all of those 250 companies on the report. I'll come in here, add a filter. You. I'll add some 4 or 5 companies. Any questions till now? No, thank you. Let's work with these 6 companies. It would be easier for us to handle the data. All right. Now, if you see in terms of row grouping, it shows me 8 items. And when I see here, these are actually 8 rows, 8 rows that are available now, unlike an advanced report wherein we can add any number of columns. Here, we don't have an option. We don't have that plus minus icon, right? What it means is at the maximum, I can specify 8 levels of row grouping, and in terms of columns, I can specify 8 levels of row grouping. I can add the maximum. Specify 2 levels of column grouping. What do I mean by that? Let's say for each of these companies, I want to know in which country my employee belongs to, or maybe their location. Location, let's select country. I'm selecting a sub-level grouping called country, and I'm saying location, address, country. I want to relabel this as country. I can define a maximum of 8 levels of row grouping. Let's see how the report output looks. Now the first level of grouping is company. Right in MEMS Canada. Right, there are 78 employees who belongs to Canada. Again in MEMS Canada, there are 4 employees who belongs to us. Still, there are some 8 employees who belong to India. Overall, if you remember, there were some 91 employees in Canada 78 plus 8, which is 86 plus 90, and there would be one other employee somewhere down right. This one employee without any company. Overall, if you see, it's still giving me the same number, right? The count doesn't change. In GIMS Canada, if I come back up in GIMS Canada, it is still giving me that overall count of 91. In Jumasuk, it is still giving me the overall count of 33. If I check, we have 31 here in Jums, Mbuk, and employees belonging to United Kingdom. And if I scroll down right, one employee in France and one employee in us. The overall count is still the same. But then, based on the grouping parameters that I select, Workday automatically assigns the same and then summarizes these values based on how we have defined these grouping parameters. How can I read this? There are 55 employees without any gender who belong to the company GEMS Canada and country Canada. There are 12 males in GEMS Canada whose work address is Canada. This is how I'll read this data. Overall in GEMS Canada, India, there are 8 employees. 6 of them do not have any gender. 2 are males. There are no females and none who have disclosed their gender. The overall count is still the same. But based on my groupings, Workday automatically summarizes me the data. I get the overall count for each row, and I also get the overall count for each column. Now, if I want, I can hide these overall counts. Next, if you see, this layout doesn't look right, right? Ideally, I would want to group all Canada, let's say companies, together, and then within Canada, I want to get all the countries. Now the reason it's giving me layout in this format, you companies are spread across multiple rows. It starts with Canada, then moves to UK and then France and then again Canada is because in terms of row grouping, we have said display data based on the total descending based on the combination now Canada and Canada. It shows the row total which has the highest number 78 Canada, Canada, and then there are 31 employees belonging to UK and UK and on and forth. Now this, as I mentioned, doesn't look right. What I would want is let's say, want to show this data based on alphabetic ascending order. Now when I'm sorting my rows across multiple or multiple subgroupings, if I save it, I get an error and the error says matrix row axis. When sorting by total, all group by fields on the axis must be sorted the same. Basically, I'm sorting company in an ascending order based on the alphabetic row total. The error says they have to be sorted in the same manner. Now I have selected alphabetic ascending and I'll say, and I'll run it now, and I'll run it now, and then Switzerland, and then I have Norway. Everything is grouped together. Then it shows me France altogether and on and forth. Or right now, even in cells. In terms of roles, we added a filter saying instead of those 250 companies, only get us companies which are Switzerland and Norway and on and forth. We can do that for columns as well. I don't want any employee or this column called not willing to disclose, right? I can go ahead and add a filter to maybe not show blank and not willing to disclose. Similar to how we added filters for our row grouping, we can also add filters to restrict our color groupings. I'm not in the selection list. I don't need employees in here, in here, in here, and in here, maybe this as well, and which is there are no employees in these categories. They are inactive, but still I have removed them, right? It wouldn't have mattered. I only wanted to remove this categorization. It shows me that row total and column total. If I want, I can hide those as well. I don't need the row total. I can enable this box. I don't need the column total. I can enable this box. Now in terms of sorting, I have some additional sort options I can define. Let's first run this report and then we'll see. It now shows me blank and male and female, and it doesn't show me that not willing to disclose based on the filter that we have created. Let's edit this report further now. At times, we don't want our rows or columns to be sorted in an ascending order or a descending order on and forth. Right? We want them to be sorted in a logical order. Now, what do I mean by that? For example, let's say I add instead of country. Let's say I add age group here or age band. Let's run this report once. This is already giving me right data. I'm adding a management level. Let's do that. All right, what are these sort options? We have alphabetic ascending, descending row total descending. We have a couple of options called logical sort order, and then there's a final option called sequence defined. When I run this, the order that is currently selected is alphabetic ascending, and this is how it shows me. It shows me managers and then individual contributors. And now again, to be fair, that this is a test tenant. You have all sorts of gibberish, right? But in this case, sorting it in an alphabetic order doesn't make sense, right? Because then it sorts it based on the first character, it sorts manager, and then I for individual contributor, and on and forth. In this case, it is taking the number into consideration. Now, that's not how I would ideally want to sort management level, right? What I would want to do is probably I want individual contributors to be at the top or the bottom. Above that, maybe we want team leaders, in this case, supervisors, And then maybe above that or below that, we need managers, and then senior managers, and then directors, on and forth. Right? That is the logical order in which we would want to sort our data. In that case, we have this logical sort order option. Only if a given object can be sorted logically, Workday would show you that option again. It may not make sense in here because there's a lot of gibberish data that people have created, but still we'll see how the logical sort order looks by going here. I'm selecting logical sort order, ascending or probably descending. Now, if you see, it sorts based on how the management level has been configured in the tenant. When we configure management levels, we configure them in that sequence by saying, let's say a CEO at the top, which is our number one, and then number two is executive vice presidents, and number three is vice presidents, and below that we have senior managers, and below that we have managers, and on and forth. Now it's not sorting them in an alphabetic order ascending. It sorts them based on that logical sequence in terms of which they have been defined. Right. Again, as I mentioned, because this is a test tenant, this is what we will get. If you see else, we have individual contributors. At the bottom, above that we have supervisors, above that we have managers, and above that we have directors and then vice presidents, and then we have CEO, right, and rest. It's all gibberish data. Logical sort order. This function is available for some objects or some fields, and if that option is available, we can go ahead and use them. In this case, if you see, still logical sort order doesn't make sense, right? But the reason it doesn't make sense is because of our data. In that case, we still have the option to define an order based on our requirement. There's a final option as well in terms of sorting, and that is we can define our own sort order, our own custom sort order. I can come in here and instead of selecting these alphabetic ascending, descending row, total ascending, descending, logical ascending, or descending, I can define a sequence for myself, and I do that. I can use a sequence if it is available. If someone has already created one, no one has actually created one. I'll create a sequence using this option. Right, I'll call it management sequence. Do I want to include blanks, employees who do not have any management level? If I select that there are some employees without any management level as well, I can say I want to include blanks as well, and then I can define the sequence in which I want to sort my data. I want to start with individual contributors. What is this number 10? I cannot find it. That is strange. Let's take this one about that. We need supervisors again. People have created all sorts of data, and above that, we want managers, quite a few managers. I'm not sure which one is which, but if you see the idea, I can define a sequence, right? And then Workday would get me data based on that sequence. Again, there are quite a few managers. I don't know which is the right one, but I'll randomly select and then selecting directors. Right? I can define a sequence. Again, as I mentioned, there's a lot of data. I'm not sure what is the exact instance to be used, but we can define a sequence, a custom sequence for ourselves. Keep in mind when we define a custom sequence, a report runs a bit slower, right? It will not give you the output. Now, if you see, it gives me the sequence that I have defined. We have individual contributors about that, we have supervisors about that, we have managers and then directors, right? And then at the bottom, because we said include all employees who are blank as well, it includes them. Again, don't worry that we are getting all blanks. It really doesn't matter, this being a test tenant, alright. Let's add a few more options to our report. I'll go back and change this to company, which is what we had earlier. Now, when I click on any of those numbers, right, it gives me the count of employees and the name of the employees against each of those numbers, right? When I click anywhere here, in this whole list on any number, it gives me the count of employees against that number, right, and their name, right. There is one employee in Norway, and that person is Lars Gundersen. Now, apart from just getting the name, I can add additional data apart from name if you see. Let me click on this number. For example, total there are 146 employees across these 5 or 6 companies and I get the name of those employees. I have something called view by now. I want to view these employees based on, let's say, their age group. I'll select age group. I can add one more criteria here, but let's keep it to age group. If you see, I have defined a grouping. These 146 employees are grouped based on their age. 84 of those 146 employees, the number that I selected at 20 under 19 are 31 to 40 and on and forth. Overall, it's for 6. Again, I want to know who are those 84 workers who are 20 and under. I can click on that number and it gives me the details of those 84 employees, right? I want to view these 84 employees based on, let's say, their gender. These 84 workers, 83 do not have any gender, right, or they have not entered. Again, I want to know who are these 83 workers. I can click on that number and I can view this by a different parameter altogether. If you see, I can view this data across multiple dimensions. Let's say I can view them, for example, based on their management level and on and forth. Right? I can keep viewing this data. 45 are individual contributors. Again, I want to see who they are and on and forth. I can see this detailed data right on when I click on any of these values. But then I can further drill down and view that detailed data across multiple dimensions. Right? And there are lots of dimensions available. Instead of clicking on this number directly, there is this arrow, and when I click on that arrow, it gives me the same set of options. Instead of viewing those 19 workers, I could have directly viewed them by their age group. Right? And it shows me there are 19 workers, out of which 10 are 20 and under, and on and forth. Right now, we didn't add any of this. This is a default attribute of a metrics report, but then we can refine this. Right? We still have the option to define and configure these drill down values. Let's see how this is done. This tab called Ready Down. I can click here and there are two options. The detailed data. What is detailed? Those actual detail values, in our previous case, the names that were coming. When we click on any summarized number, it gives you the name of the workers who make up that count. It is giving us data based on the data source and the business object we have selected, which is worker. It gives us the worker name. But then I can add any additional detailed data as well. I can say, for example, I do want the worker name. I'll say worker, but I also want, let's say, the position of the worker, the supervisory organization the worker belongs to, maybe the age, their length of service, and on and forth. This, if you see now, acts like my advanced report. Just like an advanced report, we can add columns, right? The only difference is all the columns that we add, they belong to the primary business object. We don't have the option to select any additional business object and add those columns, right? First, we'll add detailed data, the drillable fields. We had the option to drill our data based on the age group, based on. Let me run once again and then we'll see this, right? My overall output is still the same this time. However, when I click on these numbers, I get those detailed data right. This is my drillable fields. You can still drill these fields across all of these dimensions, and this is by default. However, if I want, I can restrict the available drillable fields. Just a down I can. Fields that can be summarized. We are getting default fields. Instead of that, I want, let's say, only age group and management level, and maybe let's say gender this time when I run. I still get the detailed data the way I got earlier, but my drillable fields are restricted to those three options that I added. Or right now I can, if I want. I don't want my users to see the details. I can disable drilling as well. Come in here, edit. I can disable all drilling for the report, and when I do that, I'll the numbers are no longer hyperlinks. I can just see those overall summarized numbers. I'll not be able to drill down. Now I cannot drill down further. This is a second option as well. If you would have seen, there were two options in that drop down. The first option was disable or drilling. And then there's a second option, disable drill to details for the report. When we do that again, we would only be able to see these summarized numbers. Currently, when we click, it gives us those details, and then we can go in and summarize our data based on the options available here. Right? But with the second option selected, disable drilling to details for the report, when I click on any of these numbers, it no longer shows us that details. It directly takes us to the first available grouping option. Which means we can only see these summarized numbers. All drilling that we can see, the details are disabled. Right? I can only see data based on these grouping parameters. I can no longer see those details. The details have been disabled. Makes sense, all right? Now we can add additional summarizations. Till now, we have only been dealing with a single summarization, that is count. We are only getting the count of workers. There are some additional summarizations as well that we can add. For example, I can get, let's say, the maximum. I want to check in each of these companies which employee has or what is the maximum. Let's say age. This is where that option comes into play because there's no indexed field. It is not allowing us right now. You can add a minimum right now. You can see these are all standard fields. At times, you may want to uncheck that optimized for performance box even for an indexed data source. Similarly, let's say I want to get a minimum of the length of service of the workers, length of service in months. I want to also understand, let's say, the average. What can I select? Not total base pay amount. I want to get the average of the total base pay of the employees. Wait. Let's run this right now across each of those groupings in each of the company for each of the genders. It is giving me the count. For example, there are 14 males in GMS Canada. This is the first summarization. The maximum of the age of those 14 individuals is 62 years, right? And we can check that by click. We have already added. We have disabled ruling, right? We'll uncheck that in a bit. The minimum length of service of those 14 individuals is 18 and the average total base 39, 391. Overall for GMS Canada, there are 90 individuals. Their maximum age is 62. And I can get that because if you see, there are 65 individuals without any gender. Their maximum age is 0, which means their date of birth is missing. Right across these 14, the maximum age is 62, and across these 11 females, the maximum age is 55, which means across all of these individuals, the 62 is the highest number, right? Across this total, across this 90, the maximum age is 62. The minimum length of service is 1, which is here, and the average across this entire row of total base is 64,000. It is giving me those summarizations across each of these groupings for blank and company, male and company, female and company, and overall total company, right? What I'll do is I'll remove that gender. That way it would be easier for us to decipher this data. Maybe I'll remove employees who are blank. I'll remove that gender. That way it would be easier for someone else's minister too. Has but one. Is this a wonderful way for David? And in the drill down, I would remove this option called disable. Drill to details for the report. Now it shows me data across those two dimensions, male and female, plus the total. Right? I can verify which person has this 62. When I click anywhere, I can see this detailed data now, and there's this employee, Henry L. If I sort this in descending order, right, 62, and that's what it shows me. The maximum age of workers across these 14 count is 60. System automatically summarizes data based on the dimensions we have selected. Any questions till now? Now, apart from this, we can also see percentages. If I edit this report, this would become a bit. The layout would be a bit tedious to understand, but I'm adding one more summarization. Every time Workday adds count, I still want the count, but the format is I want the count in terms of a percentage. If I scroll down, if you see there are percentage options available, right? And I don't have to build any formula. I'm just saying get me the data in terms of a percentage. Let's first run this. If you see this actually doesn't makes a lot of sense, right? What it is doing is it says in male, in this category called male in Switzerland, there is one employee which is basically than 100% right. It is determining percentage across each of these groupings. Again, female. This just one, which is overall on 100%. And then it says 1 plus 1 is 2, which is 200%. That's what it is doing in Norway. In Norway, there is just one male. That's the overall count, and that is 100%. This, if you see, actually doesn't make a lot of sense. When we are using percentages, we'll also have to define some additional options. We can get percentages across row, across column, or across the total. When I scroll down, when I've selected this percentage, if I move to the right, I have these options. If I go in here and look at the options, I have percent of column total, row total, and overall row total, and overall stored here. I have selected the option percent of column total. When I do that, and this time, when I run this report, the data makes a lot more sense. When I go in now, it is showing me the percentage of column total. The column total right for each of these groupings is considered as 100%. Overall, there are 36 males right, and we are saying determine the percentage based on this column total or each of these column totals. Overall, there are 36 males, out of which 14 are in GM&S UK, which is 30.9% of 36, 14 in Canada, again 38.6 in France, which is 16%. Similarly, in terms of females, there are 27 females, which is 100%. 12 are in UK, which is 44%, and on and forth. Each of these percentages are being determined in terms of this column total, right? And the reason is we said determine this percentage based on the column total, right? If I come back, percentages are being determined in terms of the column total. we were talking about showing the percentage right. This is a percentage of column total. Similarly, I can also add percentage of row total. Instead of saying percentage of column total, I'll say row total. Let's compare with what we saw earlier. Earlier, our columns were considered 100% and all other percentages were calculated in terms of that column total. This time our rows are considered 100%. Overall, there are 2 employees in GMS Switzerland, which is 100%. One is male, 50%, one is female. The row total this time is considered 100% and all percentages are calculated in terms of that 100%. 63 over 30, which is 57%, 27 female, which is 42%. And then we can also define percentage of overall total. My overall total is considered 100% and every other percentage is determined in terms of that overall total. The overall count of employees across these 5 companies is 63, which is now my 100%, out of which 26 belongs to GMS UK, which is 41%. 14 belong to GMS UK are male. 20% of 60. All of these percentages are being determined in terms of this overall total, which is 100%. Percentages can be calculated in terms of row total, column total, overall total. All right. There are a couple of other summarizations. Let's talk about that. Before I talk about those summarizations, let's look at one more calculated field. Now, let's say Out of these 5 companies that I'm showing, I want to group my employees not based on the companies, but based on the region. Any employee who belongs to Canada should be grouped in, let's say, GMS North America, and employees in UK and Switzerland and Denmark and Norway should be grouped in GMS Europe. And maybe I want a third category as well, which is rest of the world. I want to group my employees in these 3 buckets. There's no company called rest of the world, right? This categorization doesn't exist in the system as of now. How do we do that? How do we do that? We do that with the help of a calculated field. And that calculated field is called evaluate expression band. There are in fact 2 calculated fields which are very similar. One is evaluate expression, and then we have evaluate expression band. They are similar with a slight difference. For the requirement or the scenario with we discussed the use case, let's create a calc field. Here we have a local worker. There are 2 evaluate expression and evaluate expression band. I'll take the band first. And I'm calling it region grouping. Both these calc fields evaluate expression and expression band. They act as if else condition. If a condition is true, then if condition number 1 is true, then this is what we want Workday to return. If condition number 2 is true, then we want to return something else, and on and forth. Let me also show you the other calc field. We will not create it now. We'll create it for a different requirement. If, on the other hand, we say evaluate expression, this is band and this is expression. I'll call it manager count. We will not create it now. We'll first create the band. Now the difference, if you see, is first look at the similarities. Again, this allows you to evaluate a series of conditions and return a certain value if the condition is true. Similar to how the expression band looks. In this sense, both of these calc fields are similar. They act as if else condition. If condition number 1 is true, then return this value. If it fails, then evaluate condition number 2. Return this value. Else again evaluate the third value on and fourth. If none of these conditions are true, then return the default value. Right. Now what is our requirement? A requirement is if, let's say, the employee belongs to GMS Canada or US, then they should be grouped as GMS North America. If they belong to the other companies, they should be grouped as GMS Europe. Else, they should be grouped as the rest of the world. Right. My return value is demarcated. Let's say just North America. This is how I want to categorize my employees. Europe, right? And rest of the world. I want this condition or this value to be returned based on a certain condition. And we know how do we create that condition using a calculated field of type true or false, which means each of these condition is a KLC field again. I am creating another CLC field. Let me create CalL fields for the report. It should be North America. America, Europe. Rest of the world. I am creating another TLC field, this time of type true or false. And this would be, let's say, is North America. I will just keep it simple. Now, what is my condition? My condition is if the employee belongs to company in the selection list. And what is that selection list? Global Modern Canada or Global Modern USA. If this condition is true for an employee, then system returns this value. Similarly, I want to create another KLC field of type true, false is Europe. Company. Let's say we have the same. If the employee belongs to Switzerland or Denmark or Norway or Netherlands, Austria or Germany, Russia, again, we don't have these on our report filters. That's fine. I think we have GMS UK. If they belong here, then they should be categorized in Europe, and we actually don't need the third condition. Because if none of these conditions are true, then the employee would be categorized in the default condition. System first evaluates this condition. If this condition fails for a given worker, then only it evaluates the next condition. Again, if that condition fails, they are categorized in this bucket. We're going to test it, all right? I'll add it here. I don't need this. And let's run our report. All right, there are 60 employees. If you see, now the employees are grouped in this bucket. My overall count, if you remember, is still 63. It is still getting me the same results based on the filter that I have defined on my report, right? But this time based on the company they belong to. They are grouped in these three buckets. Now I could have created this call field with evaluate expression as well. Right now, we created this call field with the function evaluate expression band. Right, I could have created this using evaluate expression. The difference is with evaluate expression. If you see, I can still define condition or a series of conditions, but with evaluate expression, I can decide what type of value to return. With evaluate expression band system always returns a values of type text, and that's why I was able to, manually enter the text. System always returns value of type text. With evaluate expression band, I can select what type of value should the system return. Had I selected text. Now, when I go in here, if you see the return options are fields of type text, right? It will only show me text. For example, if I search for age, because it's not giving me any numeric fields, it's only giving me fields of type text. Instead, if I select numeric and then search for age, then it gives me all fields of type numeric. Evaluate expression gives me that additional flexibility to decide what type of return value I want. Now, the difference is if I go ahead and let me create a new call field, this time of type evaluate expression, then we'll see. When would you want to use evaluate expression instead of band? I want to create a calc field, select evaluate expression, and try building the same calc field that I built earlier. I'll say return field of type text. I'll select the same is North America is Europe. But this time, if you see, I cannot directly add that text saying rest of world because that calc field doesn't exist. Once again, what I'll have to do is I'll have to create a new calc field of type text constant. I'll have to create a new calc field of type text constant and call it, let's say, North America. Go in, and here this is the actual value. It will still give me exactly same results. But the difference is here. If you see, I have to build at least 3 more calculated fields, whereas with evaluate expression band, I could simply type in the return value. If you want to build a calc field which returns you values of type text, then I think the best option is to use evaluate expression band, right? Because that way you can simply type in these values North America, Europe, rest of the world. Here, for each of those, you'll have to create a new calc field of type text constant. All right. When is evaluate expression relevant? When we want, for example, to return a different field type, for example, numeric. Now here is my requirement. My requirement is if the person is a manager, then I want a count of managers and non-managers, right? If the person is manager, I want the report or this calc field to return 1 against that person. When it returns 1, I'll go ahead and sum all those return values, which will give me the count of managers. For requirements like these, that's where evaluate expression is more relevant. Now my condition is the person a manager? And we know there is an existing condition for that, an existing field for that. This is a Workday delivered field. It checks if the person has a manager role. I'll say if the person has manager role, then return 1. If the person doesn't have a manager role, then we don't want to count that. I'll say return 0, right? This time I've said return field of types numeric, and I was able to do that using this calc field. I'll come in here and I'll use another summarization. I don't want to use this calc field here. I want to use this as a summarization. Just like I'm counting the overall employees, I want to count the managers. However, this time I'll use a function called sum. Basically, if the person is a manager, it returns value 1. For each manager, it returns 1 as a number, and I would simply add those numbers, which will give me the overall count of managers. I'll come in here, see the calc fields for the report, and it only even though there are more calc fields for report. It just gives me this number, this calc field. The reason is we can only sum numeric values. Only this calc field is of type numeric, right? And that's why only this is returned and label it as manager. I'm going to remove this. When I remove this, and what we'll also do is in the drill down that we can evaluate our data, I'll add a new field called is manager that we will be able to cross-check if our report is working fine. Overall 60 employees. 1 is manager, 14 employees, 3 are managers. In this entire count of 36, 3 plus 1, 4 are managers. Can I verify that? I can click here. Let's see how many are managers. Let's see how many are managers. 4 employees are managers. In this, among females, there are no managers. Makes sense? Yes, no, alright, I'll consider that as a yes. Now when I click on a number here, it gives me 16 as 16, which is what I expect. But when I click on 1, it is still giving me 16, which is not what I expect. Right, I would expect. And if I click on the order, this is give me 16, including that manager. But my expectation would be that it gives me only that one person who's a manager, right? Similarly, when I click here, it gives me this overall number of 14. The reason that is happening is because it is still evaluating all these employees, and it in this count, it is just returning me those employees or this in terms of that number. We are adding only those numbers which are managers. Rest we are not adding, but still, when I click on it, because it evaluates those 14 workers, it gives me that entire count. The same happens here as well. I would ideally expect it doesn't give me any results, but it gives me the overall 6 right for that cell and on and forth. Now, how do I avoid this? For that, I can create a detailed data override for that particular column view. For this column, I want to define a detail. For the overall report, we have already defined the detailed data right under drill down section. I want to define an override for that particular column because it doesn't give me the right numbers for this column. Manager, I'll go to the right and define a detailed data override. It takes me to the same screen wherein I can define the columns. Here, I want worker, and maybe I only want position. But more importantly, I don't want all instances to be displayed. I only want those instances wherein the fields that I'm summarizing is not equal to 0. If you remember, our field either returns a 0 value if the person is not a manager, right? This is what we are summarizing, and this field either returns a 0 if the person is not a manager, or it returns a 1, which is non-zero if the person is a manager, and then we are simply adding it. All ones get added, which gives me the count of managers. Instead of showing all the instances, I only want those instances where the fields that is being summarized returns a non-zero, and we know it returns non-zero only for managers. Or instead of selecting this option, I could have said only show those instances wherein this condition is true, is manager right now. In this case, it is easy for me to simply select this option. Let's say I'm creating a detailed data override for this now here for all employees. If you see, it gives me a 1, right? That's why it gets counted. Overall, there are 6 employees in rest of Word. This count is returning me 1 for all the employees. If I create a detailed data override here, let's say to only show those employees who are non-managers, now in that case, I could not have selected this checkbox there. I would have created a condition saying is this person non-manager, and then said then I would have included that condition here. In some places you cannot use this option. Here, this is perfectly fine, right? Had I created a detailed data override for count overall count because it is counting all the employees. If I select this checkbox, then it will return me all the employees. Instead, I only want those employees to be returned who are non-managers. Then I would have created a condition saying is manager is false, right, and said only return me those employees wherein that condition is false. In some places, this cannot be used, right? And that's when you'll use a condition for this particular requirement. This particular option works perfectly fine. Let's run this. We have created a detailed data override for this particular summarization, and I run it now. When I click, it still gives me the overall count of 16 here, out of which one is a manager. When I click here, this time it only gives me that one person who is a manager, and for this override we only selected 2 columns, and that's why it shows only those 2 columns, whereas here it shows me all the columns which were added as part of the report drill down tab. I can define a detailed data override, alright. Let's say I want to group my employees based on the week they were hired. I want to group my employees based on the week or the month in which they were hired. For that, I can create a new calculated field. This would be a calculated of type date. I'm coming in here creating a calculated field for report, right? And if I go to date, I have a field of type format date, calling it hire week. Basically, all I'm doing is I'm checking the hire date of the employee, right? And I'm saying from that hire date, get me only the month of the hire or the week of the hire or on and forth. If an employee is hired on 1st of January 2028, it will take 02020. If another employee is hired on 1st of February 2020, it will return Luru 220. Out of the hire date, it is only taking the value that I specify in the format. There are a number of options. I can take, for example, the quarter in which the employee is hired, or year and quarter, only month, or year or month, quarter and year. Different options in which I can group my employees. I am selecting week. I can also define a custom formatting. If I select Format Mask here, I can format and it shows me the options. When I bring my cursor here, it shows me the options. Small e stands for year. If I say Y, it will show 08 stands for month. I can define the formatting that I need. For now, I'll say week. And then it's asked me, when do you want the week to start? We want the week to start on Monday. Do we only want to show the week start date or end date or the date range? I'm selecting date range. We'll run this report and then this would make sense, lot more sense. And then if we want, we can also modify the calc field. I'm saying hire week here, moving this. Let's run this. All I'm doing again is I'm doing a grouping. That's what I'm doing, just like I had grouped based on the company the employee belonged to. Here again I'm grouping. If I open this count and look at the workers, let's open one of these workers. They're grouped in this week, December 27th till January Sunid. If I go to the details, if you see, this person is hired on January, the first out of the hire date. Once again, system is returning the week of the hire for each employee, and if employees are hired in the same week, they are grouped together. This is exactly what we did for our companies as well. Or, for example, our gender as well. If that gender value is same, then the employees are grouped together. That's exactly what we did with our companies as well. Right, I can change my grouping. Instead of saying group them based on the week they were hired, we want to group them based on the month they were hired. I'm saying show month and year. They said their word there that 10 employees hired in the first month of 2000. 0 and 1 overall in the first month of 2005, 1 in third month of 2010, and on and forth. It's grouping the employees based on the month they were hired. A lot of these KLC fields can be used intelligently to get the data that you want. You just need to understand how a calculated field can be leveraged. Alright, today we looked at some important calculated fields. We spoke about evaluate expression, expression band. We looked at a number of summarizations. We spoke about the format data. I can also define custom summarizations or custom calculations for summarizations. If I edit my report, now if I come to summarizations, I have this option called if you see calculation. I'm selecting this option called calculation, and here I can define a calculation for the report. I can create a calculation for the report, not the system-wide. These are again, I can create a system-wide calculated field or report-specific calculated field. This calculated field or this calculation, this is not a calculated field. As such, this is a calculation that I'm creating. I'll click on calculation for the report. I'll call it non-managers. And I'll say summarization calculation. What is that I need? I want the overall count of the employees. Right? Against each month, system is giving me the number of employees. Right? The default summarization that we saw here. And from that, I want to subtract the total managers. Right? And that will give me the non-managers. And then I have the option. Do I want to, if my summarization, for example, or this calculation involves multiplication division, right? If I can do all of those. If the output is a fraction, then I can say round the fraction down to the nearest decimal place, round it up on and forth. There are multiple options. Again, if there is any error, we have already seen most of these arithmetic calculations. They have this option. As a best practice, I'll check that. We see this is not really a calculated field. I'm not selecting a function. Right. Date instance evaluate expression. I'm doing this calculation based on the summarizations that I have defined on the report. At times these behave weirdly. Let's run this. Overall 10 employees, one of them is manager to 10 minus 1. My non-managers are 9. 63 workers, 4 are managers, 59 are non-managers. Right. I'm simply taking the summarizations on my report. I'm simply saying take the overall count. And from that subtract this value. I've done that using this summarization type called calculation. Now this is perfectly fine. If you remember the reports that we saw on the talent management dashboard, they actually had graphics as well. We can type those charts. And we can enable those charts for our matrix reports. We can come in here. Let me change this. Let me change this. I don't want hire date. I'm changing it back to the region grouping. We can, in addition to showing that table with the numbers, we can also show a chart. And we can do that by going to the Output tab. We have not explored this tab. We did explore this tab yesterday when we spoke about the worklet options. Right? We could enable any report as a worklet and then add it on any dashboard. Right? We did speak about this tab briefly yesterday. We are more interested in this option. Currently, the output type, the default output type, in fact, is table. I can, instead of showing table, I can just show a chart, or I can also show chart and table. The moment I do that, I get some additional option enabled here. Let's not go in there for now. Let's just run this report and see how the output looks. This time I'm not just getting my table, but I'm also getting chart. I'm getting the same information. If you see on the x-axis, you are getting the regions. Across these three regions, it is giving me that there are 29 is the overall count in Europe, which is this one. The overall count in Europe is 29. Next, it shows me that percentage. HX. Then it shows me the count of manager. And then it shows me the non-managers count. It is giving me by default the chart for this overall metrics. Right? And then on the left hand side or on the x-axis, it is giving me this row grouping. I can go on top and change the chart type. This is a column clustered chart. That's what is highlighted. Instead of that, I can select, for example, do not. Now it gives me the overall count of males versus females. Or I can select any other chart type as well. But then we also have the option to change the default chart type. Let's go ahead and edit our report. Let's go ahead and edit our report. Or under chart options, the default chart type is column clustered. And I can say it should be a donut or any of these charts. I can select the chart type. But also within the chart type, I can select what I want to display. On the horizontal axis, it is showing me the row grouping. And we know the row grouping is the region. I can say I don't need row grouping. I want the column grouping. And column grouping we know is gender. And on the legend, I want to see maybe row grouping. And I want to include, let's say, only matrix 1 or matrix 2. Based on the options you select, system would automatically show you the relevant options in the subsequent sections. Let's see how this looks. I want my column grouping on the horizontal axis. My column grouping male-female is on the horizontal axis. My legend is on the vertical axis, which is the count. And I'm getting the matrix 1, which is what is my matrix 1. For males, it shows me there are 16 males in Europe. It 14 North America and on and forth. I can decide the layout of the chart. And there are multiple options available based on the permutations and combinations I select. Let's see what other options are available with respect to charts, and if I can change and select a different layout. In chart options, I have this option to define secondary axis as well. In secondary axis, I want to include what is my matrix 1. Basically, this is my matrix 1. It is. This is my matrix 2, whatever I select in that sequence. This is my matrix 3. Right? If I select matrix 3, I'm basically selecting the count of the managers. Let me add this, and then we'll see how this layout looks, and then I'll explain what I'm doing. Now, what I've done is I have created a dual graph in which I've said if I go to output, chart option, I've said enable a secondary axis as well. right? Which means now on the right-hand side, a secondary axis is enabled. On the left-hand side, it is giving me the count. Right? On the left-hand side, it is giving me the count of employees, which is basically males and females, based on the company or region they belong to. This is represented in the form of a bar. On the right-hand side, I've said enable a secondary axis. The axis that has been enabled is matrix 3. And we know matrix 3 is the count of managers. For example, in Europe among males, there is one manager. In North America, there are 3 managers. In females, there are 0 managers. And then I've said display the secondary axis as a line. If you see in male there are, will show me the numbers as well. On the right-hand side, we know that in North America, among males, there are 3 managers. There are 0 managers in North America. In Europe, we know there is 1 manager. If you see, in gender male in Europe, there is 1 which is basically corresponding to this. And in the rest of the world, there is 0 manager. This pink line, it identifies that there are 0 managers in male and female. Even with respect to our charts, we have multiple permutations, combinations available. We can decide based on our requirement. How do we want to represent our row, whether we want it to represent on the horizontal axis, on the vertical axis? Do we want it to be a bar graph, a chart, on and forth? We still have some options. For example, we can hide these legends, these totals, and on and forth. Based on the chart type you select, there are quite a few options that get enabled. Let's say under chart options, I want to go to advanced. And under options, I can give them a label. Horizontal axis, I can say this is gender. Vertical axis, I can say this is the count. And secondary axis, vertical axis, I'm saying this is overall employee count. This is a manager count. And then I have some additional options. For example, I do not want to display chart totals. I still want to display legends. If I want, I can hide them. Now I have this horizontal label. This is employee count. This is gender. This is manager count. And my totals that were being displayed earlier, those numbers, they're not going to be no longer displayed here. Similarly, I could have hidden these legends as well. We don't have an option to change the color of these. This is automatically determined by Workday. We don't have the option to customize the color. Again, based on the chart type, as I mentioned, still more options get enabled. Or, for that matter, some options would be disabled based on the chart type that you select. And we can also show a target line. Maybe, for example, the target. Let's see. Under chart options, I can show a target line. Maybe the target for managers is, let's say, 2. I'm just taking a random number. I'm just adding a target line. And I'm adding this number called 2. And let's run this. And then we'll see how the layout looks. Right? What I'm saying is it's showing. This looks a bit weird when we have a dual graph because we have 2 here as well as 2 here. Right. Basically, my requirement was the target number of managers across male and female should be 2. That's my target for my firm. However, if you see for males here, the achieved the managers is beyond the target, whereas females it is less than the target. If you want some visual representation, in that sense, you have set up a target, and that way you can then analyze what metrics are beyond the target or below the target. Right? As I mentioned, this actually doesn't make sense because in this scenario, because we have both x vertical axis on the left hand side, which has a number 2, and it shows the target line there as well, right? And it shows the target line on the right hand side as well. You are right. Any questions are till now? With Donut, some extra options are enabled or some different options are enabled. And they're not extra because some options are disabled. For example, with Donut, you cannot display dual graphs. It all depends on the type of graph you select, right? The moment I select a donut chart, if you see that secondary access option is disabled. With a donut chart, you can only display one matrix. I'm saying my legend is row grouping. And what is my row grouping? It is the region the employee belongs to, right? And then I can decide on the metrics to include. Under Advanced, I have the additional options. Do I want to show percentages? Do I want to show field values? These two options are enabled for a donut chart. But then, as I mentioned, a number of other options are removed. It all depends on the type of chart you select, and there are lots of options, permutations, combinations available. At times, it's a matter of you checking different options and deciding what layout works best for you. With Donut, if you see it, it shows me those numbers because that's what we selected, show us chart numbers, and it also shows us those percentages. We selected those two options, all right. It's a question of you deciding what layout works best for a given requirement you're working on. The rest of the options of a matrix report are exactly similar to that of an advanced report, or for that matter, any of the other report types. Just like an advanced report, we are still able to define filters right. It doesn't give us the sub-filter option. The reason the sub-filter option is not enabled for a matrix report is because we can only select data from the primary business object prompts. Again, based on the filters we define based on the data source we select, we can add prompts. Again, if I click on Populate Undefined Prompt Defaults, there are 3 default prompts built in prompts from the data source, and I have the exact same capabilities. I can specify a default value, I can specify value at runtime, I can hide them, I can make them required, and on and forth. With the 2 prompts, again, the same instructions if I want to, which is also the case for an advanced report. It's just that we didn't look at it. Again, the sharing options are exactly the same. I may say do not share the report definition. Share it with all users or specific users and groups. With respect to advanced, again, a lot of options are common. We didn't look at those options with respect to an advanced report, but these options are similar to an advanced report. The first thing is exclude execution link from search. If I go ahead and include this report in, let's say, a dashboard, and I want this report to be only accessible through a dashboard, I don't want employees to search this report individually right through their search bar, then I can enable this option. When I do that, even if I have access to it, I'll not be able to search this report. Check this box if you want to exclude the execution link for this report from the search results when a user performs a global search. They'll not be able to get the report when they search for it, but then they still be able to access it from, let's say, the dashboards, if they are added to it. And that is usually when we exclude reports. And as I mentioned, this is relevant for an advanced report as well. Then we have enable save parameters. Now again, this is irrelevant for advanced reports as well. It's just that we didn't check it there. When I save this, what it does is it allows me to save my run parameters or prompts instead of me having to enter them every time. I can just enter them once and save them. For that, I would basically remove this, because if no prompts are displayed, then this option actually doesn't make sense. Let's remove this and let's see what this option does. Enable save parameters. Now when I run it, if you see, I have the option of saving my prompt parameters. For example, let's say I want to run this report for only employees, and within employees, I want maybe the interns and regular, and then I'll call it, name it saying employee. Let's say regular/intern, and then I'll save it right. And similarly, I can save multiple parameters. I can, for example, save another parameter for contingent worker and I'm calling it contingent contractors. Save it right now. When I run this report again, this time, if you see, I want to select this parameter. It makes my task easier, right? I can save the parameters with which I would want to run that report. Going forward, whenever I run this report, right, I have those parameters saved. I can select them right and I can run them. It makes my task easier, right? Or the task of the end users easier. Because we have hidden the save parameter, because I have access to it, I'm able to search it. Let's search now. It is not giving me the option to run this report. Now, the reason I'm getting this option is because I have the report writer access. Let me search for that other report and then we'll see the difference. Let's search for that advanced report as well. With the advanced report, if you see, I have the two options. One is the report and the report definition. This is the option which an end user gets to run the report. Now, because I have hidden the search parameter on my matrix report, I don't get an option to run the report, but me being the report owner and me having the report writer and the report admin access. It still gives me the option to the report definition to see the report definition right, but for an end user, they'll not have access to see report definition. They'll not get any results right. I have that additional access, and that's why I see this option right. This is when you hide the report from the search parameters. Advanced reports have a couple of other options under the Advanced tab. I think there's just one which is relevant for us. Again, exclude execution, link enable save parameters, and then I have the option freeze first column. When I do that, this is similar to an Excel, right? My first column gets frozen. It doesn't move and I can see that column details. This allows me to see the data in terms of my preferred currency. In HANSIM, you would have, or in your basic training, you would have looked at in terms of compensation. How do we define a preferred currency? When we do that, it allows us to see any currency information. And when I say currency information, for example, if I'm seeing the salary amount, not just in the default currency, which is dollars, but also in my own preferred currency, right? If I run this now real quick, if I run this right, and then scroll to the right, my first column is frozen. And then I can, as we saw with the other report, I can enable save parameters in terms called I can exclude the report from search web service options. These are relevant for integrations. Now, when I search for my report P1, I only get two options. I only get to see the report definition right and not the report itself. But still, because I am admin, I would be able to run this report from the definition. I am obviously the report owner. As an admin, as a report writer, I'll still be able to access that report, run that report, and I have the same parameters enabled that. Please do like, share, and subscribe to our channel. For more information, contact us sales@therightuptalk.com.